Okay, would you like me to do the introduction right now?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
cool, thank you. Buenas noches, mi nombre es María Angélica, mis pronombres son ella, ellex, y hoy mi colega Flavia y yo estaremos proveyendo interpretación en español con MARP Language Services para asegurarnos de que esta información súper importante sea accesible a todas las personas sin importar el idioma que decidamos hablar. Entonces, hoy se va a llevar a cabo la interpretación de dos formas. Si ustedes están conectados desde su computador, en unos momentos, en este momento no, pero en unos momentos en la parte de abajo a la derecha de su pantalla van a ver un globo que dice interpretación. Le hacen clic al globo y pueden elegir español, inglés o no interpretación. Y también pueden elegir si quieren escuchar el audio original a un nivel muy bajo y al intérprete a un nivel más alto, o si quieren escuchar solamente a la intérprete, solamente eligen el audio del intérprete. Si están en sus teléfonos, en la parte de abajo a la derecha van a ver tres punticos. Si tocan los tres punticos, eligen interpretación de idioma, eligen español, inglés o no interpretación, y cuando terminen, eligen hecho o done. Queremos nombrar el hecho de que, aunque el español en este espacio es un idioma de liberación para nosotros, es un idioma colonizador, y la bandera de España, que es un país colonizador que ha borrado muchos de nuestros idiomas, es el que representa el idioma que estamos hablando en este momento en el Zoom. También queremos reconocer a todos los idiomas que están presentes en este momento, para los cuales no estamos ofreciendo interpretación. Y también, a modo de inclusión, vamos a llevar a cabo interpretación en género neutro de español, el cual rompe las reglas de la Real Academia Española, para darle espacio a todas las personas en este idioma que ha sido impuesto sobre nosotros. Muchas gracias. Y para las personas que se están conectando por Facebook, la interpretación la van a poder escuchar llamando al número 786-665-8802. Es el número que está en la pantalla, y también a lo largo de la presentación la van a poder ver en la casilla del chat. Gracias. Good afternoon, my name is Maria Angelica, and today my colleague Flavia and I will be providing Spanish interpretation with MARP Language Services, in order to make sure that this very important information that is given today is accessible to all of us, regardless of the language that we choose to speak. The interpretation is going to happen in two different ways. If you are in the Zoom right now, in a few moments, not right now, in a few moments, you're going to find a globe at the bottom right-hand side of your screen that says interpretation. If you click on it, you can choose Spanish, English, or no interpretation. So you choose the language in which you want to listen, and you can also choose to hear the original audio at a very low sound, very low volume, and the interpreter's voice at the higher volume. You can also choose to mute the original audio completely, and you will only hear the interpreter. And if you are in the phone, at the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see three little dots. When you touch those dots, you can choose Spanish, English, or no interpretation. And then when you're done, you press done at the top. We want to name that Spanish is a colonizer language, and the way that Zoom pictures this language is with a Spanish flag, which is a colonizing country. And we want to name that, even though Spanish, like offering interpretation in spaces like these, is a way of liberation for us, Spanish has created erasure of many languages that are not here today. And can you still hear me? Okay, cool. And we will also be interpreting in gender neutral Spanish, against the laws of the Real Academia Española, which is the one that dictates the way that we speak Spanish, because we want to create inclusion in our languages, regardless of the rules of the language that has been imposed over us. So if you want, also, and if you're on Facebook, you can call the number 786-665-8802 if you want to listen to the interpretation and you are joining on Facebook Live. And you can turn the interpretation now.
Thank you so much. Immense gratitude to Maria Angelica and Flavia for providing the interpretation for us today. Just want to say hello to everyone. Welcome to our webinar presentation on who is incarcerating us in Maricopa County, the role of sheriffs and county attorneys in the carceral state. We have an incredible lineup of people who will share some political education as well as wisdom from their lived experiences around these issues. My name is Tiffany Yang. I'm a staff attorney with the Advancement Project National Office, and I am excited to be here to moderate the conversation we're about to have. Now, before we start, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items for all of us today. The first is Spanish interpretation. This webinar is being interpreted simultaneously into Spanish, and there are two ways to access that interpretation. Maria Angelica went through those two options at the very beginning of this presentation, but just to summarize for anyone who joined a few minutes late, if you are not on the Zoom, you can call in to the number below, 786-665-8802, or there is the opportunity to use the interpretation service through Zoom with the instructions on this slide. Now, just for a few more housekeeping items, everyone attending will be placed in listen-only mode during the webinar. And so if you have questions throughout the presentations, please write them in the chat box, either in Spanish or in English. And we will have someone collecting the questions to be asked and answered during the Q&A session that will come at the very end of this webinar. Now, before we go into the heart of this, we're just going to go over the purpose for the conversation today. We'll learn more about the role of sheriffs and county attorneys in Maricopa County in this community. We'll hear from directly impacted people about how certain policies and practices result in racial profiling and other inhumane actions. And we're going to learn how we can best support ongoing campaigns to demand change and hold sheriffs and county attorneys accountable in our communities. Now, the speakers that we'll be hearing from today include Jacqueline Garcia from Mi Gente, Noemi Romero from Puente Human Rights Movement, Veronica Torres, also from Puente Human Rights Movement, and Losmin Jimenez, the director of the Immigrant Justice Project at Advancement Project National Office. Now, before we continue on and learn from people and their lived experiences around these issues, I was asked to provide just a very short history of policing to ground us in our perspective. And I want to just talk very quickly about two things: what we mean when we say policing, and how from its very birth, policing in this country has always been about criminalizing people of color and protecting white wealth. Now, when we talk about policing, we have to see it as an entire system of control. It's not just the beat cops that patrol the streets. Policing includes all law enforcement, including sheriffs and ICE and CBP. It includes everyone who decides what is and is not a crime and who will be defined as a criminal. It includes everyone who prosecutes and fights to put people in cages, like the county attorneys. And so it's important to remember and remind ourselves that policing does not exist in isolation. It is an entire system of criminalization and control. Now, the history of policing is really instructive on this. When land and power were stolen from indigenous communities in a colonized America, who was doing the policing? You had sheriffs, who were large landowners appointed by governors to protect the land of the most wealthy residents. You had night watchmen who patrolled the streets and reported disturbances. You had patrols of enslaved people, who many historians consider to be the first organized police force in America. They were well-armed paramilitary groups that roamed on their own authority to chase and attack anyone suspected of being a Black enslaved person, all in order to uphold systems of white supremacy. Now, even this wasn't isolated just to the South. Even in the West, when white settlers stole land and power from indigenous communities, you had similar groups of patrols whose job it was to keep indigenous and migrants of color out of the cities built by white settlers. And last but not least, you have white vigilantes who use violence without consequence, often with the complicity of other law enforcement, to terrorize communities of color. Now, it's no coincidence that when formalized police municipal departments grew in American cities, it was a direct response to the abolition of slavery. White politicians rewrote the laws to criminalize the everyday actions and movements of Black communities so they could trap them in the criminal punishment system and continue to impose segregation. This was true also of other communities of color, of migrants of color, and of our indigenous communities. Now, another reason for the growth of police departments was to put an end to the growth of labor organizing and working class uprisings against white wealth. Large employers wanted to replace their private security guards with public police officers, and so they made this a reality. Now, all of this remains true when we look at policing today. The past is not the past. We see how the police prioritize property over people, especially when that property derives from white wealth. We see how the police use their powers to terrorize, intimidate, and inflict violence on communities and migrants of color. We see how white supremacist vigilantes continue to be and are protected by the police today. We can still see all of these roots, all of these legacies of our history in modern day policing. Now, with that grounding framework, I'll turn it over to Losmin Jimenez, the director of the Immigrant Justice Project at Advancement Project, to provide a little bit of political education around the roles and responsibilities of sheriffs and county attorneys in Maricopa County.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that. So here we are, modern day sheriffs. And what are modern day sheriffs? Well, first of all, people need to, if we didn't realize it, we now know. These folks are elected. It's written out in statute what powers they have. So it's not like they make them up. They have delegated powers. Every state has different different powers that they give them. Arizona has some unique features, but every state has delegated authorities to the sheriff, and sheriffs are elected. There's very few places where they're appointed. Next slide. So, when we're talking about policing powers, so generally they have powers of discretionary power of who to arrest, investigations, the warrants. The warrant has to be signed by a judge or a magistrate, but generally that's what they do. Where does this happen? In rural or incorporated areas, and they have contracts sometimes with cities or towns, in courthouses, at airports, waterways, ports, and we know that also in schools. So it's like, we know where Arizona sits, there's often collaboration with federal law enforcement like the Border Patrol and the and ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Next slide. So in Maricopa County, where Puente is headquartered but works around the state, there is a history of racial discrimination in Maricopa County in the sheriff's office. And the sheriff that a lot of people know is Joe Arpaio. And there's a lot of things that we can say about him, but what we can say is that he was found guilty of racial profiling by a federal judge. The organization that we collaborate with, Puente, we're going to get into more about how those policies apply and how they work in real life. But just knowing that the way he carried out his office, that he was elected, was found to be guilty of racial profiling. Federal judges found him guilty of racial profiling. Traffic stop analysis shows that the sheriff's office is more likely to stop, search, cite, arrest Latinx and Black drivers and white drivers in Maricopa County. Next slide. Other powers that sheriffs have is they manage the county jails. Maricopa County has a lot of jails, the 4th Avenue jail being one of the biggest ones. And They also manage smaller regional jails, women's jails, but thousands of people are in their custody. They administer the programs in the jails like drug and also drug court, probation. They're responsible for transportation to and from jail and also access to medical care. Next, or lack thereof. Next slide. There, you know, as we were saying earlier, and in this slide, MCSO stands for Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. There are decades-long civil rights violations that were happening in Maricopa County. There are a lot of findings by different courts about excessive force, wrongful death, and most recently with COVID-19, there was an explosion inside the jails of COVID-19 because as we know, medical neglect is the norm inside prisons, inside cages, and we can, you know, no one can socially distance inside a cage, and access to soap, water, basic human rights, basic human dignity is almost impossible inside a jail. So you can imagine any type of disease spreading. And so as we see in this slide, from 6 to 313 cases in just 2 weeks, and over 1,600 people have tested positive inside the jails. Next slide. This is Maricopa County again, where Phoenix is. So one thing about Arizona that is particularly important is that what happens in Arizona in terms of immigration ends up being replicated across the country, and it's ground zero for experimentation. So 287G, which is a contract that the sheriff signs with ICE. This was, I think, one of the first ones in the country, if not the first one, Maricopa County, by Joe Arpaio. Currently, there isn't one, but ICE is still involved in the jails. But this allows federal law enforcement to, one second, we're just having a technical difficulty. Hold 1 second. Sorry about that. So 287G is a contract that the sheriff signs with ICE, making local police officers like ICE officers. There's also ICE detainers, which allows the jails to hold ICE, people for ICE longer than the time that they're supposed to be there, basically an illegal arrest. And in Arizona, unfortunately, was the first state to pass this horrible law, SB 1070, which is the Show Me Your Papers law, which is still in effect. I don't know if people realize that certain pieces of it didn't go into effect, but the law is still in effect. Maricopa County has the third most highest arrests in every country. ICE arrests of every county in the country. Right now in the 4th Avenue jail, which is the biggest jail in Maricopa County, ICE agents are inside that jail, even though there's no contract saying that they have to be there. That's just a decision of the current sheriff to let them be there. Next slide. So the other thing that sheriffs do is carry out orders of the court. So things like evictions, asset forfeiture, like repossessions, they help with that too. And again, given COVID, we know that there are so many people who have lost their jobs, and so there are going to be a lot of evictions that are going to be happening. So the sheriffs are actually going to be the ones enforcing those things. So that's another area of work that people need to be prepared to think about, you know, for long term. But that is something that sheriffs work on also. Next slide. And these are just some headlines, and this presentation will be available to people, to participants. But just so folks know, just MCSO there, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, the jails that they manage have more COVID-19 than all Arizona prisons. And that says a lot because Arizona had a huge outbreak in the prisons. And the incarceration crisis that is in Arizona, it has the 4th highest incarceration rate of anywhere in the country, and it has the highest incarceration rate for Latinx people in the country. So if you can imagine that just the county jail system has more COVID than the prisons, that says a lot. And even detention officers are concerned about the risk of COVID inside the jails. Next slide. again, just bad, bad news about what's happening. Federal lawsuit filed against Maricopa County for the treatment of people inside the cages for COVID-19 for their failure to treat and provide medical care, again, which are duties of a sheriff. Not unique to this sheriff, but that's part of all sheriffs. So this is just a snapshot of what the budget looks like. This is the budget for Maricopa County. As you can see, it's $513 million. The county spends $513 million on the sheriff's office, but only $72 million on public health. So when we think about what powers we have and what roles we have, we, getting involved in the community, in groups like a Puente Human Rights Movement, other groups, and being part of going to meetings, holding agencies accountable of how we feel like dollars should be going towards the services that our community members need. So this is just one example of how much money they have. And these are the kinds of things we need to be looking at, of like, who are we electing? And once we elect them, how are we holding these people accountable? Because at the end of the day, these are tax dollars that we're, doing that. Next slide. So the current candidates right now, and again, this is a C3, this is a nonpartisan event. It's just, we just want to make sure people have the information. The current sheriff right now, his name is Paul Penzone. He is a Democrat and he's the current sheriff. The person who's running against him, his name is Jerry Sheridan. He is from the Republican Party and he worked closely with Joe Arpaio for more than 20 years. You can check out their platforms on the internet. I urge folks to Google them. We can say from looking at Jerry Sheridan's platform that he wants to bring back Tent City. He wants to put more police officers in schools, and he thinks the volunteer posse is a good thing. I forgot to mention, that's something that's unique to Arizona and maybe some states in the West, in the Southwest. When the country was expanding, when white settlers were taking over, and there weren't as many formal police officers, right? As Tiffany was sharing, white vigilantes, became enlisted, and unfortunately, some of that is still with us today. And so there is something called a volunteer posse that sheriffs can kind of enlist. And in Arizona, Maricopa County, there is a volunteer posse. From what I understand, it's been put kind of out of commission, but they want to bring it back. So that's just something to look out for when you're looking at different platforms. What are the values? What are they saying they're going to do? What do they want? What do they don't want? Next slide. And just wrapping up this section, because we really want to hear from Veronica, Noemi, and Jacqueline about their direct firsthand experiences. But just as we said, want to provide political education on these roles. So county attorney, what is a county attorney? In some states, people call this the district attorney or the state attorney. In Arizona, it's called the county attorney. And a county attorney is a prosecutor, and a prosecutor is a lawyer who represents the state in a criminal case. And under Arizona laws, these are all the things that a county attorney can do. Prosecute felonies, serve as legal counsel for the county board of supervisors and all county departments. And I'll just give an example. What does that mean? That means if the sheriff engages in racial profiling, the county attorney is defending the sheriff, okay? So think about that and think about just how the roles kind of work together, can be working together, or how one role can check on another role, right? Keep people in check. They also set internal policies related to charging decisions. They investigate allegations of police misconduct. So that's important if we hear about police misconduct, shooting of unarmed people, of arresting of protesters, excessive force, that type of thing. They influence what laws get passed at the state legislature. They control public information related to the criminal legal system. Maricopa County has the third largest public prosecutorial agency in the country, serving the fourth largest county in the US, approximately 3 million people. So what happens in Maricopa County, how the county attorney kind of behaves, impacts the rest of the state, and you can say impacts the country. Next slide. And who is the current county attorney? Again, this is a nonpartisan event, but just so folks are aware in case they're not aware. The current person is Alistair Adele. She's the current Maricopa County attorney. She was appointed, so she was not elected. She was appointed after the former county attorney, Bill Montgomery. He was appointed to the Supreme Court. That means she wants to stay there, so she's running. And my colleagues are going to talk about some of the things that they experienced under the former county attorney, but some of the things that happened were that the former sheriff was doing some unconstitutional things, and like raids and sweeps of people. And instead of protecting the rights of the people who were unconstitutionally arrested, the prosecutor prosecuted people for things that they were arrested for, even though they were arrested in a way that violates the Constitution. So just think about that. They allowed raids, as we talked about that, and there was an investigation with the Department of Justice about this. And one of the things that was happening was non-citizens were receiving like harsher sentences than US citizens, which we know violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. Next slide. So the current county attorney is Alistair Adele, I'm sorry, typo there. So she has to, she's been appointed, she's going to run. The other person is Julie Gunnigal, she's a Democrat, and you can read more about their platform. And there's an article, an interesting article on The Appeal, which is a national magazine, on how one election might strike a blow to mass incarceration in Arizona. So this election has a possibility of changing things big for Arizona. Thank you. And sorry, we're gonna go to people's stories. This is just our last slide.
Thank you so much, Losmin. I think now we'll be turning it to Jacqueline Garcia from Mi Gente.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Jacqueline Garcia with Mi Gente. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here tonight and being part of this panel. But first, I do want to share a little bit of my story. So I was born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona, but my family is from Chihuahua, Mexico. The majority of my family was undocumented. So growing up, we had those conversations at home with my mom and dad on, how, my mom would tell my dad, like, be really careful when you're out there driving, make sure you come back home, just be really careful. So we had these conversations at home. So I knew that my parents were undocumented. I knew, what challenges come with that, and how careful and also this always ongoing fear that was in these conversations and with the family. And so I understood all of that, and I also just had that thing like, why? Like, it's not fair that just because for a paper, there are folks that are being treated completely different, that are being mistreated, and it's not fair, it's not right. So fast forward a little bit, my dad in 2012 was arrested, and he was processed, went to ICE, and he was deported back to Mexico. At that same time, my mom was really ill. And at that point, because, my dad was the sole provider for me and my siblings, and he was no longer here, I kind of had to take on that role for my family. So I, started working, making sure, my mom was going to her appointments and my brother was going to school. And it was really difficult. I will say that there was a point where I was working multiple jobs. I was working like 3 jobs, just to make sure that, my mom we had the money to buy her medications because she was also undocumented and we didn't qualify for healthcare. So it was a really challenging having to go through that. And, also I experienced it firsthand, but there's so many families, not just me. There's so many families out there that are going through these situations. Their families are being torn apart. And it causes pain for our community. My mother, because she was ill, unfortunately passed away in 2014. I took on guardianship of my siblings. And, this is why I'm still here. Like, I was directly impacted. My family, I have multiple family members that have been deported. My colleagues, my friends, all the stories out in the community that you hear, their families being separated, or how, the way that things are in Arizona, how those things have impacted them and their families. And that's why I'm still here. That I think it's really important, all that to say that, we have a very important election year, and we can't lose this opportunity. We have the opportunity, we have to make sure our friends, our families, that we're sharing, spreading the word that we have to be casting our vote. We have to cast our vote to ensure that we're electing people, the right people into office, who will support our communities, but not only that, people that we can hold accountable, because it's not just about electing, right, someone in office, but afterwards, what comes after? There's still work about holding them accountable, making sure they're staying true to the things that they committed to, right? Making sure that our families and our communities are safe. So it's really important, really big year, and we have to make sure that we're spreading the word and getting folks to cast their vote this year. The county attorney and sheriff's department are responsible for criminalizing our communities and separating our families. Majority, as we all know, people of color. And it's not just, they capture, criminalize, and mass incarcerate, which is why this year is so important, and which is why we should all be casting our ballots and spreading the word, making sure, the voter registration deadline, was adjusted, so we have until October 23rd, so folks can still register to vote. We should be spreading these messages out to our friends and families and colleagues everywhere. This year is really important, and we have a huge opportunity, and I believe that, we can't let it just, pass by. But thank you very much. I think that this space that we're in right now is really helpful, just to kind of hear our own stories and just to share our experiences with one another. But thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think now we'll be hearing from Noemi Romero with Puente Human Rights Movement.
Hello everyone, my name is Noemi Romero, and I am a family advocate with Puente Human Rights Movement. I was born in Villahermosa, Tabasco, and brought to Arizona at the age of 3. Where we came to live in Glendale, Arizona, where I went to school from pre-K all the way to high school. Growing up, I was, normal child. I used to love playing soccer. I was actually part of a team named Pumas. And in elementary school, I really enjoyed playing the violin, and I always looked forward to the Christmas concerts that we would have for our families. After high school, I encountered many difficulties in higher education and enrolling in school because I didn't have the proper documentation. Since I couldn't go to school, I turned to looking for work. I struggled quite some time to find a job. So for many years, what I did was I would help my mom babysit kids at home. One day I was given the opportunity to work as a cashier at a market, and I quickly said yes. It was in 2013. 4 months later, I found myself surrounded by sheriffs who marched into the store where I was working at, asking for documentation, which was obviously something that I couldn't provide. I remember freaking out, shaking, very scared, and one of the sheriffs came up to me and said, "Bring up your last customer and go have a seat with the rest of them." What I did was I pulled out my phone and I sent my mom a text message, and I said, "Los sheriffs llegaron, the sheriffs are here." that was the last text that I would be sending my mom for the next 3 months. I remember walking out of the store, my hands tied with zip ties. And the first person I saw walking out of there behind the yellow tape was my mother. And I remember her words, Mimi, no firmes nada. Don't sign anything. After a few hours, I was taken into custody. I was booked into Fourth Avenue Jail, which is was one of Arpaio's jails, where I was then booked into Estrella Jail, which is also one of the jails at MCSO. My journey in the immigration process then continued. I was held on charges for identity theft and forgery. I was given a harsher sentence due to the former county attorney, which was Bill Montgomery, who, and for the people that were caught in the raids, of course, were given harsher sentences. After spending 2 months in jail, my charges were dropped down to criminal impersonation of felony 6. So if Bill Montgomery wouldn't have been in office, I and thousands of others would have not been charged with these charges. And if our system would have someone in office who prosecutes people with fairness and equality, we'd be in a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate everyone's courage so far, sharing their experiences. I think now we'll be hearing from Veronica Torres, also from Puente Human Rights Movement.
Hello, everyone. My name is Veronica Torres. I'm the Criminal Justice Coordinator for Puente Human Rights Movement, and I also am formerly incarcerated. I served 25 years in prison, and I went in at the age of 14 and was released a year ago. While incarcerated, I was more of a student than anything else. So through the conversations that I was having with my peers on the inside, I learned. And then I started seeing trends. So the majority of my time was spent initially getting into trouble, trying to figure out how to be a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, dealing with my hormones. And then trying to figure out where I was, what was my purpose in life, what happened. Went through a lot of things. That's a whole other story. But when I talk about the trends that I started seeing, one of the things that I saw a trend in was plea agreements, where defendants were pretty much scared into taking pleas rather than going to trial. Defendants or people who opted for trial ended up with more time in cases where the defendants chose not to be the state witness for the person who actually committed the crime. And so they end up serving more time than the person who committed the crime. Something else I also noticed was overcharging of people and using those charges as negotiation tools to get someone to take a plea by reducing the number of charges that they were originally given. I also seen the practice of stacked sentencing for the same case number. And the stacked sentencing resulted in like double-digit to triple-digit sentencing. And often these were non-violent cases when the option to run the sentences concurrently are there. I also saw people that were accused and charged years later for crimes, alleged crimes that were committed years before. Even when these individuals are in custody, so if they were already in custody, say these charges were something that happened even before that time frame, people were moving on with their lives, being rehabilitated, doing great things, and then 5 years later, they're being charged with crimes. And also while working for Puente, I've spoken to a lot of family members of incarcerated people, and it's interesting to hear their side of it, and for it to be so genuine. These people haven't been locked up before, and yet they're saying, why did my son get so much time? Why did my daughter get so much time? You know, why did they come back later? So this is something that is happening a lot. It's trending. So we also receive letters from incarcerated people explaining why they believe there was an injustice in their case. And of course, we do background, we do as much research as we can with our partners to kind of get a gauge on what really happened in these cases. And based on what we did see, yeah, it's crazy, the sentencing that we are receiving in Arizona, and the way we're being sentenced, the way we're being charged. In my case, I was 14 years old and essentially sentenced to die in prison. In 2012, there was a landmark decision made by the United States Supreme Court that allowed juveniles a meaningful opportunity for release. But while Arizona, with the help of the county attorney, refused to acknowledge the United States Supreme ruling until it was flooded with a bunch of juvenile cases asking that we be resentenced. By 2014, legislation was passed allowing me to be here right now with you. Just last year, the county attorney paid $520,000. That's a number I've never, wait, hold on, $520,000. The county attorney paid that much money for a report to be written by a psychiatrist that argues to keep children in cages for the rest of their life. The US ruling did not altogether ban natural life sentences for juveniles, but it did say that it should be a rare practice to sentence a juvenile for the rest of their life in prison or to natural life. Our current county attorney never debunked the report and is reported saying that she will rely on it when seeking life terms for kids. In this situation, the Maricopa County, Arizona courts are behind the times in adapting science that helps defendants' cases. And they are behind in evaluating draconian laws that would be considered cruel and unusual punishment at best. Like, for example, if you think about the felony murder law, it says that if in the commission of a felony someone dies, whether at the hand of the co-defendant, a bystander, or a car accident, you can be charged for felony murder and serve the rest of your life in prison for a murder you did not commit. It was abolished in England in 1957, and traces of it go back as far as 1535. And it was introduced in Illinois in 1827. California recently changed its law and got rid of the felony law. And this law needs to be removed from the Arizona law books, or the sentencing structure needs to change because the intention isn't the same as intent. And that's a whole other conversation. But what I'm trying to get at is that these are draconian laws that are in place that need to be reevaluated. The sentencing structures need to be changed. And I don't think that anyone, if in a long time, and especially when you think about the 25 years that I've been locked up and waiting for something to change, it hasn't happened. And so what are we doing here at Puente? We are working on making these different changes, but we are also reaching out to our communities to help them to be educated so that they could understand what is happening to their families, especially the ones that are being directly targeted by policing. So we're talking about, communities getting educated, understanding what is happening, what is the platform, vote. And then of course, if you want to be more active, if there are people who have passion about it, who are into this stuff, but they don't know they don't have a platform to speak up or to help other people, come to Puente, call us up, talk to us, we're more than ready to, work with you to help that process as well, to help the process. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I think we'll very quickly, before turning to the Q&A, if folks have questions that they want to ask our panelists, please do so in the chat box, and we'll be asking them in just a short moment. But before we do, I believe we wanted to share just some important dates about voting. Losmin, did you want to share?
Yes. So these are just some important dates, and just, disclaimer, Tiffany and I are not voting rights experts, so we can't get into the details. And our organization will be doing some webinars separately with our voting rights experts about voting in Arizona, actually. But just some general dates. So Arizona's deadline to register to vote, it was extended to Monday, October 23rd. So you still have time. Today's October 14th, so you still have time to register to vote. There is a deadline to register to vote by mail, which is the same day, Friday, October 23rd, it's deadline. There are some special things that happen for Maricopa County, that they have some text alerts and things like that, but just some early voting dates available now through October 30th. And of course, election day is November 3rd. And again, we just want to say that what's important is we all know that there's a presidential election on November 3rd, but there's also a lot of sheriffs on the ballot too. And we have to think about voting through that entire ballot. We need to think about how those people are going to oftentimes impact us. I know it may seem hard to believe, but impact more than the federal government, if you will. When I think about what I was hearing from Veronica, from Noemi, from Jacqueline, they were so impacted by what was happening locally. And whatever's happening at the federal level, that's one thing, but what's happening locally, and that impacts them so much more. And oftentimes, the first point of contact with the criminal legal system, because there is no justice, with the criminal legal system, often it's either a traffic light, or for young people, it's an arrest at school. I remember when I did juvenile cases, that's how I started my working, is representing young people. My first client, he was 16 years old. He'd been arrested for a fight at school. He was being bullied, and he was 16 years old. And this was in Florida, and they had a zero tolerance policy on fighting. So he was arrested for a felony. And I remember they wanted him to plead guilty to God knows what. And so it was like, this is it. But what was the first contact? It wasn't anything with the federal government. It was that school police officer in that school. So getting involved in your school board, getting involved in these sheriff's races and these county attorney races, understanding who is on the ballot. Who is on the ballot? What are the values? What is important to your community? Is it to get police out of schools? Is it to cut off immigration enforcement? Is it to have more funding from jails go to community service rather than to jails? What are the values that are important to your community? That is what you need to think about, and is who is doing that. So think about that, and just understand that what you're voting for on November 3rd is not just the president, it's about the sheriff, the county attorney. And when I read about the fact that people want to bring back Tent City, and if folks don't know what Tent City is, maybe that's something that someone can share. before we go into questions, if people don't know what Tent City is or was, well, first of all, it's no longer in existence, but it existed for many years, over 20 years. But it literally is what it sounds like, Tent City. And you know, in Arizona, it gets to be 120 degrees sometimes. So imagine you have been arrested and you're being held pre-trial, and you're being held in a tent, and it's 120 degrees out, and if it rains on you, and if it's 120 degrees out, it's 120 degrees on you. Imagine what that means in a time of COVID. You know, think about that. We believe that violates every human right there is. It violates the Constitution. I believe that's cruel and unusual punishment, and you haven't even been sentenced for anything. But people want to bring things like that back, and it's like, why? Why is that? Why is that? It's beyond my consciousness, but that's what some folks want to do. And if, you know, think about the values, what is important to your community? Is it getting police out of schools? Is it cutting off immigration enforcement? Is it getting people, ending cash bail? That's the other thing. We didn't really get into this, but if, you know, your bail is set at $100,000, or people being arrested for being a sex worker, or people being arrested for marijuana possession, things like that, things that they don't necessarily need to be arrested for those things. Those things we need to challenge, because right now, look at what's happening in our society, and are these things actually helping anyone? Our organization believes in abolition, and we believe that, you know, just if more funding is spent on human services, some of these problems wouldn't exist, at least not to the extent that they exist now. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting a note that the voter registration, they changed it again. I know it's like been pending in court. There was a litigation, and yesterday when we checked, it said October 23rd. So if there's been a change, I apologize. But anyways, I don't know if somebody wanted to talk about Tent City before we went into regular Q&A. But these are just some important dates, and I'm gonna also drop in a slide from something that we had on our website. But again, because of litigation that's been happening in voting rights, deadlines keep changing. So understand that what may be on a website and what even is on a PowerPoint that we created like in the, you know, recently may have changed. I think at this point, I would just say if anybody wants to share something about Tent City before we go into questions and answers, let me know.
Well, thank you so much, Losman, for sharing that. And I think maybe we can include conversations around Tent City in some of the Q&As that we're going to be doing starting now. I really just want to echo the immense gratitude to our speakers, especially to Jacqueline, to Noemi, and to Veronica for sharing their life experiences and sharing some very vulnerable moments from their past. And I guess just to start the Q&A session off, you know, one question that I know has been on a lot of our minds, and Losman spoke a little bit about the current COVID-19 pandemic, just how ill-equipped the sheriffs and the jails have been in protecting people from the virus. You know, this moment I think really emphasizes just how dehumanizing our policing and prosecution and incarceration systems are, and how so much of it is a choice. You know, sheriffs and county attorneys have the power to do things differently, and they choose not to. And so one question that I would love people's perspectives on is, you know, what are the types of demands that generally we could be making, not candidate specific, of sheriffs and county attorneys to avoid inflicting further harm on our communities during the pandemic, but also after?
So, I mean, I think you know that Puente has been very clear about our demands, which is we demand that the most vulnerable be free. We demand people that, you know, who are right there about to be released, let them out. We hear every day at Puente what is happening, the conditions of confinement in the jails, the prisons, state, federal. I mean, the commonalities are that what we're hearing are that, you know, medical people in prisons, people aren't, so even if they test positive for COVID, they're quarantined, but they're not given any medications. They're asked to buy their own medications. They're not getting visits. Their food on the weekends, because it was alleged that the kitchens, that the COVID was coming through the kitchens because visitation, people aren't allowed to go into the institutions like visitors. And so it was thought that it was coming through the kitchens, from what I understand. And so on the weekends, the food has been reduced to 2 sack lunches a day. And so that's not a lot of food. And if you see what people are being fed, it's not gonna help if you have the COVID to fight that sickness. There were also COVID tests being done where the nurse didn't have on gloves. She wasn't washing her hands. She wasn't changing her gloves. She was using the same gloves to test people. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on about the stories, the letters, everything that is happening. And then so, like, what can be done after COVID? Something, I mean, yeah, we have to look back at the laws. We have to look at what other states are doing that is more understanding to communities, to people, to circumstances in people's lives. You know, what were the options or the conditions that led to somebody ending up in the position that they are in life? And that's a bigger care conversation. But it's just cruel and unusual punishment. It's not humane the way people are being treated. It's not right. It is not right. Because people make mistakes in life or make bad choices in life, it doesn't give someone else the right to make a bad choice to decide that this person deserves to be treated less than human. So there's a lot that needs to be done in Arizona, and we at Puente and a lot of organizations, but we at Puente, we know because we're speaking, are speaking directly with the people. We have story after story after story. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah.
No, thank you. And you know, I feel like the really tragic and terrible thing about it is that it's not unusual, right? It's cruel and usual practices that we're now seeing throughout our jails by police, by sheriffs, by county attorneys. And they've created it so that it's just something that happens every day now.
And something I wanted to say real quick about Tent City. So I've never been there before, but I mean, in 25 years, everybody who was there, you know, and I think Arpaio didn't shy away when he said that the reason that it was done, you know, was to humiliate people. I'm gonna put you in pink boxers. I'm gonna treat my dogs better than you, and I'm gonna let everybody know that these dogs are gonna get treated better than you. I love dogs. But what I'm saying is that he was allowed to do that with the permission of everyone who is in a position of making decisions for people, for our people in Arizona. And so he was also given permission. He didn't have the power alone. You know, he had people working with him, sheriff, county attorney, everybody. So the purpose of it was wrong. And I know that Penzone, when he went in, he said that he was going to remove them, and he did. But again, there's a lot of other things that doesn't excuse what is happening now.
Noemi, I wasn't sure if there was something that you wanted to add before we moved on to the next question. We do have a question in the Q&A box for the webinar. It might be a little bit specific to immigration law, but the question is, out of curiosity, what is the practice in Maricopa County regarding U visa certifications? How likely is law enforcement to sign I-918 Supplement B? Listen, this might be for you.
Sure. And I was going to say, so I have not done a U visa in Maricopa County, full disclosure. I have done them in other jurisdictions. According to their website, I'm just going to put it in the chat box. That's what they say. That's what the sheriff's office says, that they would do it. That we have some people from the legal advocates that work in Puente. We can ask them. I can say that, and people don't know, the U visa is something for people who are crime victims, and there are certain qualifying crimes, and law enforcement, and it can be a judge, it can be a prosecutor, it can be a law enforcement officer. So it's the different categories of law enforcement. Like I said, a judge can do it too. It's just certain qualifying officials set by the law, and they sign it that you've been a victim of this crime, that there's been like a mental harm to it, and that you've been helpful. In some places there doesn't need the jurisdiction. Some places add on more than the federal law says, but you need this law enforcement certification to be able to apply for a U visa. And a U visa provides you a work permit. There's right now years and years of wait to even get the work permit, but it ultimately is a path to a green card. So it is one way for persons who are undocumented to have lawful status. And I can say, just previously, I used to live and work in Florida. There was one Broward County Sheriff's Office. I don't know if they changed their ways, but they would not sign it. They just wouldn't do it. And just signing it doesn't mean that person gets that benefit. Immigration determines it. But they just wouldn't do it. They said, we're not doing this. And some people make up rules like, well, if the crime is this many years old, I'm not going to do it. So anyways, Maricopa County has an official policy that's on their website. This is what they're saying. I'm going to say that's what they're saying. But I don't know if Noemi or Veronica, if you know, like what's happening in real, like what's really going on, what you've experienced from, because I know you guys work with different folks. Noemi or Veronica, have you heard of the practice for U visas there, or not familiar with it, or no?
I'm not, sorry.
That's okay.
Not familiar.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, we put the policy, what the sheriff's office is putting out there. So that's what their official policy is. Okay, that's what they're saying.
I think just one more question that we wanted to ask is, so much of the conversation today is around the election and voting and how important that is, and not to diminish that at all. But besides voting, what are other ways that people can become involved in these movements and this work as the election nears? I don't know if anyone had thoughts or ideas, efforts that they wanted to share.
I just wanted to say that the folks that you see here, Veronica and me, are part of a group called Puente Human Rights Movement. We've said that before. So they were organizing for over a decade before some real changes happened. So we can say that organizing works, and protest work. And we also know that lawyers are not the answer for everything too, right? Courts are not the answer to everything. No, they can look what they're doing out there. They're interpreting. They don't want to, they think it's okay to throw incarcerate a 12-year-old for life, even a 50-year-old. That's not right either. Doesn't matter, right? So we know that. I can say that and I don't want to take words out of their mouth, but I know that one thing that is really important that happens at Puente is there's a lot of political education about how different systems of policing interact. And so people are, know their rights, they know what their rights are. So, and if there's a raid, also there's people on the ground, there's a rapid response network, there are people on the ground taking pictures of what is happening, so to take pictures of, hey, bad things are happening, look, they're using tanks, look how they're treating people who have no weapons, look how they're treating women and children, look what's happening, bringing a light to this darkness that's happening, right? They're also exposing unconstitutional violations. They're exposing human rights violations. And all those things, once again, happen outside of an election, and also sometimes happen outside the courts, right? There's the court of public opinion. But there's a lot of things that a group like Puente, so if you don't live in, you don't live in Arizona, there's other community groups that you can join, you can learn about your rights, and you can learn about seeing the changes that you want to see in your community, and be organized, right? And if something happens, if one of your loved ones is arrested, that there's this network of people that can help you know your rights and help you navigate the system, and also be able to defend yourself, and also defend others, because we know that there are many ways to challenge the system. There's legal advocacy, there's public advocacy, there's different things that can happen. But I think that one of the most powerful things at Puente is that they teach people their rights, and they organize and they support one another, and they're there for one another. And I think that is very, very powerful. And that's one way that, and that's how people have survived for hundreds of years, right? Because people of color, indigenous people, people they've been trying to kill, right? They've been trying to exterminate. So how do you survive, right? I don't know if Veronica or Noemi wanted to share something about that.
Sorry about that. Well, it's about organizing. Yes, it is. It's about community, and it's about communication. And so I guess that's, organize where you are, yeah, like organize where you are, sit down, and organizing starts with a straight conversation and you agreeing that something isn't right. And then you do your research and you prove yourself right or wrong, prove this process right or wrong. I think no one wants anyone to think for them. We just want to introduce information for you to think for yourself, think critically, and then make a decision about, how you want the world to look for you, for your family. Because right now I can tell you also that some of the directly impacted people, family members that we've spoken to, it's sad. When somebody gets locked up, and, when somebody gets locked up, either a child loses their mother or their father, and people can say, well, they shouldn't have been making those choices from the beginning, or, they're guilty. They're guilty until proven innocent. That's pretty much how we have agreed to move in the world together. And so, it still doesn't give anyone the right to treat people less than human beings. But yeah, it starts with the conversation. It starts with researching. It starts with you just getting up and moving your feet, going around, just figuring it out. Get to know your community. And the youth, they're the ones, they're going to pave the way. There will come a point in time where we are long gone. And what are we going to leave our youth with? Because it's them. They're the ones that are going to eventually lead the way. What type of information are we passing on to them? Yeah, it's just, that's what it is. And here at Puente, like, yes, you do we have we have 9 curriculums that we take people through, one of which is know your rights. Know how to conduct yourself when engaging with law enforcement. Know what your rights are, know what the best conduct is to get the best result. When you're going through the system, what is it that you should be doing? We do give you the history of Puente. We give you the history of prisons in Arizona. We give you the history of policing. So learn the information, get the information, the factual information, and start schooling each other. I did that on the inside with all of my peers. I would sit there, research, and I was the little, you know, one person. I would go be like, do you guys want to learn about the law? Let's go to the law library. 2-week workshop, designed it just right there, just sat there and we did it together. And a lot of women now, you know, are in there teaching each other. So power in numbers. You know, that's the best way that you're gonna fight power with money, is power with numbers. That's all. Again, I could talk, just so you know.
No, I love that. Power in numbers. We keep us safe, right? It's the only way to do it. I think, you know, we've had such an incredibly robust conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. I guess just before we ended, I wasn't sure if any of our panelists wanted to just share some last words or thoughts with our audience.
I just wanted to share quickly that we did a report with Puente, and when I say we, is Advancing Project, and I've been putting it in the chat box, called, you know, the carceral state of Arizona, the human cost of being confined. And it's about, and it was co-created with Puente, the art, the graphics, it's all Puente. And it's about the mass incarceration crisis in Arizona, and also the connections with in mass incarceration and the Polimigra, which is the police and the immigration enforcement working together, and all these racist laws working together, and also immigration enforcement. We didn't really get into immigration enforcement today, but we saw how all the systems coincide. And one of the detention centers that we went to that Puente works in a lot is Eloy Detention Center in Eloy, Arizona, about an hour from Phoenix. And our organization went inside and did a stakeholder visit, and we spoke to people, and we have their stories in this report. So if you want to see this report, we put the link in the chat box, and the report's also available in Spanish. And there's some videos too. And there's a video by a woman named Betty, and Betty served the longest sentence of anyone in Arizona, for a woman who served the longest sentence. She was incarcerated for, I think, 50 years. And she shares her story and also what's going on inside the prisons. And as there is a mass incarceration crisis in Arizona, but even like the detention center, Eloy is the deadliest detention center in America. It has one of the highest suicide rates in the country. So just, if you want to know more about Arizona incarceration, immigration, and the different systems, you can go into that report. Because this today was just a segment of like the roles of the sheriff and the county attorneys, but it's like, then once, you know, you've been impacted by those folks, this is what ends up happening. And that's why it's like, if we can do something on the front end, you know, we can change the trajectory of things. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Veronica, Noemi, any sort of last words?
Of course, no, just kidding. No, I mean, I just wish everyone, wow, live life to the fullest, you know, and let's make a change. Go out and vote, get educated, educate your people, educate your community, your families, get everybody involved. And just some real quick, Arizona is the 3rd largest public prosecutorial agency in the nation. Arizona is the 4th largest county in the US. We're the 4th highest incarcerator and the 49th in education. 49th in education. That's all.
Wow.
On that incredibly powerful note, everyone go vote, get educated, like Veronica said, organize locally, find a group to tap into. Many, many thanks to all of our panelists. Many thanks to our interpreters. Thank you for coming in and listening. We appreciate everyone for all that you are doing. Thank you.
Just one last thing, just Noemi, have anything left? So just one, do we have any, Noemi, did you want to say something before we go?
Nope, just thank you everyone for having us. And I agree with everything that Vero said. You know, let's go out and make a change.
Okay, I think at this time, we're going to be ending our webinar. Thank you all for joining us. For those on the West Coast, it's a little early. For us on the East Coast, it's a little late, but we're happy to be here because these are our people. I love these folks. We've been working together for 3 years. Second home in Arizona. So thank you all, everybody. And this webinar is also being recorded, so it will be available. We'll be sending the PowerPoint to folks in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout in your email if you registered, and it will be uploaded on our website. We also have some graphics and power PDFs about the different sheriff's roles in Arizona too. So we'll have that on our website. Thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day, whatever you're doing, and vote November 3rd. Thank you all. Bye.